When you look at this enemy, what exactly makes their presence so off-putting? This disquieting feeling that makes you feel equally disgusted, yet sympathetic. You can almost feel the indescribable pain these people harbor. Mentally, who knows how tangled their mind is up there, and physically, it must be hell to just exist in that body. What conveys this perfectly is how their faces are disfigured in such a visceral way. 2007's Bioshock is responsible for creating some of the most unique video game enemies ever created. What's unfortunate, however, is that these unique faces lead into a rabbit hole that unveils Bioshock's darkest secret. There's a moral dilemma behind the design of these enemies, a dilemma I've been mulling over for years now, and personally, I'm not entirely sure how to feel about it. This is one of the many foes you encounter during Bioshock. More specifically, this is Toasty, a wannabe ladies' man who's very much down on his luck here in this Art Deco hellscape. His lines often range from downtrodden statements about his game with women to schizophrenic ramblings about his facial disfigurement. Some of his dialogue also insinuates that he's done horrible things to the women that have rejected him. On an average Bioshock playthrough, you might kill this fella roughly around 72 times. In fact, he's one of the more common enemy models you'll come across throughout your journey. That's 72 times you killed someone based on a real person. Okay, well, not exactly, but in the making of Bioshock, technical artist Nate Wells admits the team used a resource called Project Facade to pull enemy design inspiration.
Actually, Ken had found this thing online, and it was called Project Facade, which was some of the early attempts at sort of plastic and reconstructive surgery to treat soldiers at the end of World War I. Those were kind of a disturbing inspiration for some of the faces some of the ways that you see the splicers' faces are distorted, came from looking at those pictures. Yeah, cringing at those pictures.
To describe Project Facade more thoroughly, it's a collaborative art and science project compiling photos and documents of early facial reconstructive surgery. The man behind the scalpel was Sir Harold Delph Gillis, an otorhinolaryngologist who developed a myriad of innovative plastic surgery techniques for soldiers who became disfigured during the horrors of the Great War. It's some of the most fascinating medical records ever dug up. And yeah, it's truly haunting. But to say that the creators of Bioshock slightly pulled inspiration from this project is an understatement. It's clear that they blatantly put the faces of these men into this game and got away with it. What Irrational Games did here is very clearly wrong, but it breaks open the lid to a dozen questions. Why did they not take more creative liberties? Does it enhance Bioshock as a whole or ruin it? And ultimately, do we find that it even matters? I'd like to explore this thought exercise with you and to discover why Bioshock was designed the way it was, to examine Project Facade and its implementation into this video game, and to discover the ethical, legal, and moral implications behind the enemy design of this seminal piece of art. So would you kindly take a seat and join me as we delve into the Bioshock problem? This video is brought to you by Mantis Sleep. Listen, if there's one thing I value more than anything else on this God-given earth, it's great sleep. There's nothing like being zoinked out into the middle of nothingness, just straight chilling in the void, man. But listen, it's kind of hard to get there sometimes. That's where the Manta Sleep Mask comes in. This thing has helped me ease into a never-ending black void time and time again. It's cool, breathable, super comfortable, and it fits the human face perfectly. The adjustability is wild. The material is truly premium. You really get what you pay for with this thing. You also get true 100% blackout, like peering into the absence of color itself. If you frequently deal with migraines or if you're just having a stressful day, you also can get these cooling eye cups to help you out. They're a lifesaver if you're in dire straits. And if you want more options, they got silk, weighted, and even sound masks with Bluetooth headphones. Don't skip out on valuable sleep. Get your Manta Sleep Mask today. Use code LANDO at checkout for 10% off. Thank you, Manta Sleep, for sponsoring, and thank you for watching this incredibly wholesome and uplifting video. Goodbye. Now, right off the top, I'd like to preface by saying I absolutely adore this game. Ken Levine is one of my favorite creators on the planet Earth, and I have nothing but respect for his creative pursuits. Judas looks fucking awesome. That said, there's nothing wrong with being critical over how his games are made. It's well known that Bioshock was painful for many of the developers to create, but it resulted in something very special. Bioshock still stands as one of the most important video games ever made, an underwater first-person shooter that plays with the notion of being a silent protagonist, while also being a critique on extremist philosophy. Most notably, Ayn Rand's objectivism, a philosophy rooted in reasonable selfishness and perceiving reality as objectively as possible, not by faith or spirituality, but solely through reason. Ayn Rand and her objectivist philosophy is the backbone of Bioshock's setting, Rapture, an underwater metropolis with a truly free capitalist market.
A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small.
Through this exploration of the unrestricted, we watch humanity's creativity inevitably blossom into something macabre. This is what Bioshock is all about, understanding what went wrong with the city, all while trying to stay alive against the lively denizens of Rapture. They're grotesque,
Let me go!
It's no secret that Bioshock was an idea in flux for many years. Development began as early as 2002 as a spiritual successor to the critically acclaimed System Shock 2. From an infested space station to an abandoned Nazi lab, the core themes and settings of Bioshock were constantly in motion. You can most obviously see this reflected in the early concept art. The splicers originally looked more monstrous, more in line with System Shock. It's quite fascinating, yet uninspired and generic. However, once the setting changed to the submerged Art Deco metropolis of Rapture, it was decided that the splicers should take on more of a residential, human look. With the new setting locked in, the team returned to the conceptual stage of enemy design. One huge source of inspiration was early 20th century mugshots. Something about the hardened expressions of these people offered the right kind of grit the team needed for an enemy to look thoroughly striking. Also, these mugshots go unnecessarily hard. They had no right making these criminals look so goddamn cool. It was also during this stage when Ken Levine introduced the team to Project Facade. As we know, this resource documented the visages of early facial reconstructive surgery. This became the ultimate source of inspiration for the splicers, aggressive-looking figures whose internal pain is etched into their faces. Using these soldiers as the template worked. There's no denying they're very effective-looking enemies. If you've played the game, you know as well as I do that there is an noticeable tinge of sadness with the splicers. They look terrifying, they're out of their minds, but they still feel remarkably human. They're still people even if they've been driven insane by the machinations of Rapture. But who was the face behind the splicer? Who was Toasty? World War I caused injury the likes of which humanity had never seen before. The use of artillery shells in particular led to facial disfiguration unique to the time period. Though facial alteration has been a part of human history as far back as ancient India, the birth of modern facial surgery began in World War I through Sir Harold Gillis. Dubbed the father of modern plastic surgery, Sir Harold Gillis established the Queen's Hospital in southeast London to offer treatment to the ever-growing population of men in need of a new presentable face. Throughout the years, Sir Harold Gillis treated roughly 5,000 servicemen who were desperate to reintegrate into society. Most of Gillis's work can be found online today through various websites and articles, and one such website was Project Facade. Featured on that site was World War I 2nd Lieutenant Henry Ralph Lumley. In 1916, Lumley was commissioned as an officer in the Royal Flying Corps. To become a pilot, he attended Central Flying School in Uphaven, where he put in the work deemed necessary at the time and graduated shortly thereafter. Pilot training at this point in history was incredibly rushed. In fact, most pilots were independently flying within 6 to 12 weeks of joining the war effort. It's no wonder that becoming a pilot during this era was an incredibly risky endeavor. Many died before they even finished their training. Lumley, however, was among those who graduated. Unfortunately, the very day of his graduation, he embarked on a solo flight in a BE-12 and crashed upon landing. On impact, the plane was enveloped in fire. Miraculously, however, he survived, but not without horrible trauma. Lumley suffered horrific facial disfigurement. He lost his left eye and could barely see out of the right. His hands and legs were also severely burned, thus restricting his movement for the foreseeable future. After the accident, Lumley was admitted to King Edward VII Hospital for Officers. In constant physical and mental torment, Lumley became hopelessly addicted to morphine. A year later, he was transferred to the newly established Queen's Hospital in Sidcup, where he was treated by Sir Harold Gillis. The idea behind his procedure was to remove the facial scar tissue and replace it with a large flap of skin from his chest. The initial procedure showed promise, and the results were documented. This was now Lieutenant Lumley's new face. Sadly, due to the size of the graft and his already weakened state, the skin was rejected. Too much was done too fast and the graft became gangrenous. Lumley died of heart failure 24 days later on March 11, 1918. He was 25 years old. Lumley's case was instrumental in advancing the treatment of burn victims suffering extreme facial deformity. Today he rests at the Hampstead Cemetery in the Greater London area, and while he's remembered for his contribution to the medical world, many of us now know him as the face of Toasty from Bioshock. And he's not the only one. If you take a look at the design documents, there's a splicer variant dubbed Waiters that resembles General Walter Yeo of the Royal Navy. The breadwinner splicer also appears to be inspired by Private Faye W. of the Royal Army. It's clear that Irrational Games didn't just use Project Facade as inspiration for enemy design, they directly took the faces of these men and implemented them into this game. With all the context now established, we can take a look at the ethics, legality, and morality of the situation. Ethics will explore the societal standards, the rights and wrongs of using someone's likeness in the eye of the public. Legality will explore what legal basis Irrational Games and the men in the photo have against each other, and morality will be our own personal exploration of this concept and how we personally feel about art doing such a thing. To begin, we have to acknowledge one simple fact. It's very insensitive. I mean, for God's sake, this splicer's a near direct recreation of Lieutenant Henry Ralph Lumley, and they named him Toasty. They put this man's face on a splicer who is obviously an awful person. He's vicious, and on top of that, it's insinuated that he's very sexually violent. There's no getting around the fact that putting Lumley's face on this guy was needlessly callous and cruel. On a large scale, most people would agree on that front. So from the jump, this case is ethically dubious. Now, there is an argument to be made that the disfigurement of the less fortunate has always served to inspire those who create disturbing pieces of art. Francis Bacon, for instance, is known for his disturbing works that feature many gruesome-looking subjects. After his passing, it was discovered that he utilized many medical textbooks with unnerving images to further the disturbing nature of his art. So, what's the difference? Bioshock's a BAFTA award-winning video game. It was the linchpin for the "Are video games art?" argument, and is widely regarded as one of the best video games ever created. But that's just it. It's a video game, meaning it's interactive by nature. Francis Bacon wasn't using medical textbooks to create subjects for millions to bludgeon, electrocute, incinerate, shoot, or maim. It was a representation of torment, not committed by the viewer. Bioshock is an act of art. We're incentivized to engage in violence because that's how the game was meant to be played. When we pick up a wrench and meet a splicer for the first time, our first instinct is to bash their face in until they stop moving. Games like Bioshock often have us participating in heinous activity. It speaks to something darker within us, not only to participate in the violence, but to see it unfold. Bioshock isn't alone in this. A similar scenario was conducted by the developers of Dead Space, who studied autopsy footage, medical photos, and accident victims to strengthen the design of the necromorphs. They wanted to understand just how bodies break down, rip, tear, and transform, and unfortunately there's only one way of knowing how they do that. This is actually a fairly common practice within the games industry. Many developers subject themselves to gore in order to capture a realistic spirit that appeals to the player emotionally. Yet as far as we are concerned, most developers don't directly rip off the likeness of someone who's been drawn and quartered on a live leak video. The tragic fate of these people and the medical work referenced are simply used as templates by other developers. There's no clear identity to the gore, but there is a clear documented identity to the men who find their face in Bioshock. The reality is, Lieutenant Lumley's likeness was used in a game where you are encouraged to kill him over and over and over again. The only bone you can throw to Irrational Games in this regard is that technically, you don't have to kill the splicers. In fact, there are only 7 mandatory kills in Bioshock, and none of them are based on real people. However, it still doesn't excuse the use of their likeness. To cap this all off, Irrational Games never issued a public apology, so it's unclear if they feel any sort of remorse over the situation. It is worth acknowledging that the Toasty Splicer was redesigned for Bioshock 2, and it bears no resemblance to any identifiable man, but Irrational cannot take credit for this since they didn't develop Bioshock 2, dummy. Fucking idiot. Before I begin the legal side of the conversation, I'd like to admit that I am by no means a lawyer. I don't know law very well, and this is the most research I've ever conducted on law as a subject, so forgive me if I don't do the concept justice. If anyone would like to add anything or correct anything I say, please feel free to do so in the comments below. That being said, Irrational Games is certainly at fault for putting the faces of World War I into an art form they had absolutely no concept of. Not only was there no way of knowing that their faces would be accessible to view for the entire world at a moment's notice, there was no way of knowing that their faces would be put into a digital realm for players to endlessly interact with. It's impossible to know if these men would be okay with their likeness being used in such a manner. So, hypothetically, if they were still alive and if they are vexed about their inclusion into this game, what legal standing do they have? Well, thankfully, there have been similar cases conducted for other video games that we can look to for reference. Famously, in 2014, Lindsay Lohan alleged that the cover girl of GTA 5 and another character within the game was based on her image, voice, and personal history. Rockstar claimed that the lawsuit was founded on a legally meritless claim. In fact, the face of the promo art was based on a model named Shelby Wiellander. 6 judges at the New York State's Court of Appeal unanimously rejected Lohan's privacy case, ruling that the in-game character was merely a generic actor/singer. Rockstar did not use Lohan's actual name, photograph, or voice. The court also notes that Grand Theft Auto V is a work of fiction and satire, which grants it First Amendment right protection. However, the court acknowledged that video game characters can in some cases be considered likenesses under New York's privacy laws. Taking this back to Bioshock, we can clearly see that they directly used Lumley's photo for the concept art and translated it into the 3D realm. Going off of that alone, if Lumley were to pursue a case, there would be some legal merit to his claim. Irrational Games violated their right of publicity, a legal concept that protects the individual from unauthorized use of face, voice, or name. So now the question is, if Lumley took Irrational to court, would he win the case? Well, he has a chance, but it's highly unlikely. Since the Splicers don't exactly represent their real-life counterparts, they cannot be a violation of a person's right of publicity. Obviously, it doesn't take a genius to acknowledge that the Splicers are clearly not the people they take their physical appearance from. On top of that, Bioshock's a very stylized game, meaning that the pilot's appearance is an artistic expression and not a direct replication. Another similar scenario was discussed around Naughty Dog ripping off the likeness of Elliot Page for Ellie's design in The Last of Us. Page did not feel the need to take Naughty Dog to court over the matter, probably because it was clear that Ellie was not a direct ripoff of Elliot Page. These are extremely tough cases to win, and the effort and embarrassment is most certainly not worth the slim chance of compensation. So ethically, Irrational Games is in the wrong, but legally, they do have a right to make an alternate version of anyone from history. But what about morally? At this point, you have to acknowledge something within yourself. Do you even care? Be brutally honest with yourself right now. When was the last time you thought of the reputation behind a World War I veteran? In 2025, do we really care about artists using the likeness of someone who's been dead for over a century now? Well, I mean, that's for you to figure out. At this point in the video, all I can do is share my own personal feelings on the matter based on my own moral compass. And honestly, I care, but not to the degree where it truly matters. I have empathy for what these people might have felt if they were alive to see their faces in this game, but they aren't alive. They haven't been alive for a long time now. Still, imagine it. On the war front, you are someone who has been significantly damaged, psychologically and physically. Your former self dies as your new face is grafted onto your skull. These men sacrificed more than we can possibly realize. They had to live a life we can't even conceptualize, not only witnessing the horror of war on a global scale, but witnessing their physical identity become something repulsive. Then to have that identity used as a video game enemy for millions to endlessly kill over and over again, it's awful. But how much empathy can you have for these people, really? There's only so much emotional bandwidth we have as human beings, and if you pay attention to the world around you, it can be very emotionally draining very fast. Do I reserve my empathy for men who died in a horrible war over 100 years ago? Do I give my empathy to parents who just lost their child in a school? I can give my empathy to both, sure, but the skew is teetering heavily on the side that is the most relevant to me. World War I is already seldom discussed in the modern day. It was horrible, of course. I can't imagine how torturous the life of a man was in this war. But we are so far removed from that era that it's harder and harder to truly empathize on a personal level. The fact of the matter is that there is no way of knowing whether or not these men would be okay with their likeness being used in such a manner. And at this point, it doesn't matter. Accountability at this point feels performative, because while we all agree it's awful, nobody really cares. So what do we do with the information bestowed to us? The line was already crossed. There's no going back, but there's still a very special game here that I want to appreciate. Well, in truth, it's hard to acknowledge that Project Facade does add to the visceral illusion of Bioshock. Despite its fantastical nature, the game feels eerily plausible. Of course, building the equivalent of New York City underwater is ridiculous, that plasmids are just magic, and that Big Daddies aren't real, but Bioshock is so sincere and immersive that it sort of tricks you into thinking that, yeah, this could happen. Just knowing that people looked like this at one point in time enhances the dire nature of the splicers. That in one horrible accident and with one horrible procedure, people can look like this, today, right now. It makes the game hit that much harder. That kind of immersion is, frankly, pretty cool. It even ties into Bioshock's themes. The morality behind art. Where should the line be drawn? Rapture incentivizes people to go off the deep end. It's how so-called artists like Dr. Steinman and Sander Cohen were able to have such prominence. The basis of Rapture is to not cater to the constraints of public perception. It's about going to the extreme to satisfy your own creative itch. That Irrational Games did something extreme with real faces fits in a sort of twisted way. Now, obviously, it's not exactly the same. They're not disfiguring people on purpose to put them into this game, but it echoes the theme of creating art on a razor's edge. Some of the best art ever created is born from torment. You think of Van Gogh and how his mental illness contributed to his genius, how Stanley Kubrick abused Shelley Duvall on the set of The Shining. It's not excusing the horrible things that have been done for the sake of art, more so acknowledging it for what it is. At a certain point, when the quality of art is undeniable, we all collectively excuse the negativity for the sake of enjoyment. The dilemma is acknowledging how it makes you feel based on your own morality. Irrational Games are not vindicated for using the likeness of these heroes. Personally, I'm of the mind they should have done more to differentiate the splicers from the faces of Project Facade, but it's a little too late for that to change now. Does it hinder my enjoyment of Bioshock? Slightly, yeah. I definitely feel weird smacking Henry Lumley in the face over and over and over again upon replaying, but in truth, I still adore this game. To cap this video off, I'd like to commemorate the men of Project Facade and all the hardship they had to endure. I hope you, the viewer, remember their contributions to the medical world, and not just remember them for being the faces of the splicers. Pay your respects to the dead and carry on knowing that you have the privilege of living a life they never had. To all the men within Project Facade, may you all rest in peace. Thank you very much for watching my video. I'm sorry if I ruined Bioshock for you. I just find this topic really fascinating. I'm curious though, how does my opinion make you feel? How do you feel about this subject? Please let me know in the comments below, and obviously remain courteous to one another. I don't want a whole Rapture Civil War in my comment section. I'm not as laissez-faire as Andrew Ryan. Once again, big thank you to my patrons over at patreon.com/LandoYT. If you would like to have your name in the credits here on screen right now, please pledge to a tier that makes the most sense for you. If you don't do it, I still wish you a very lovely morning, afternoon, evening, maybe even a night. I don't know. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. I hope you all take care out there. Goodbye. But wait, before you leave, might I introduce you to my new show, Code Cleric, a gaming podcast, co-hosted by my good friend, Osidangem. Episode 1 is live right now. It's about games that shaped us into the people we are today, and in that episode, I bring up the Bioshock games and how they had a personal effect on me. So if you're looking for some supplemental content in between video essays, might I recommend that you check that out. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys next time.